So why did the brand new People's Republic of China move to annex Tibet back in 1951? It's a huge question, and to really get it, we need to dig into strategy, a ton of complex history, and a single rebellion that changed absolutely everything. Let's get right into it.
This quote from Mao Zedong himself, right when the PRC was founded, really just says it all. You can see right away, this wasn't about population size or even natural resources, not at first. For China's new leadership, Tibet's value was all about one thing: strategy.
So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling. What was it about this remote, high-altitude plateau, a place with its own unique culture and its own long history, that made it so essential for Beijing? Well, the answer is a mix of security, history, and, as you'll see, a massive rebellion that forced their hand.
Okay, first up, let's just look at this from a military and strategic point of view. For Beijing, an uncontrolled Tibet was a massive, gaping security risk. Think of it like this. The Tibetan Plateau is like a giant, elevated balcony that looks right down into the heart of China. If you control that balcony, you have a huge strategic advantage. But if a potential enemy controls it, well, then you've got what military strategists call a soft underbelly, this huge exposed flank right next to critical provinces. For the new communist government, securing this frontier wasn't just a goal, it was an absolute necessity.
And this idea helps explain a fundamental challenge for pretty much every Chinese dynasty for centuries. China has this core periphery structure. You've got the densely populated core where most Han Chinese live. But wrapped all around it are these enormous, sparsely populated frontiers, home to non-Han groups like Tibetans, Mongols, and Uyghurs. Figuring out how to control and secure these vast peripheral areas has always been a central problem of Chinese statecraft.
Now that's the geography, but then you throw in the history, and that's where things get really complicated. See, the situation in 1949 wasn't some blank slate. The PRC inherited a relationship with Tibet that was, to put it mildly, ambiguous.
Back during China's last dynasty, the Qing, Tibet was what you'd call a protectorate. China had officials in the capital, Lhasa, but the local Tibetan government handled all the day-to-day stuff. But here's the key part. When the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1913, that link was broken. For the next 30-something years, Tibet basically ran its own show as a de facto independent state. That meant when the communists took over in 1949, there were no Chinese government offices, no tax collectors, no real institutions of rule on the ground at all. They were starting from scratch.
So, you're the new PRC leadership. You have this massive frontier problem staring you in the face. What's your first move? Well, it turned out to be a mix of military muscle and a negotiated deal. And this all happened incredibly fast. By late 1949, the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, was already getting ready. A year later, they fought and easily defeated the small Tibetan army in a key battle. With the PLA ready for a full-scale invasion, Tibetan delegates in Beijing were in an impossible position. They had little choice but to sign what's called the 17-point agreement, which officially made Tibet a part of the People's Republic of China.
But here's the thing. An agreement on a piece of paper is one thing. Actually controlling a place as vast and remote as Tibet, that is a whole different story. Beijing's authority there was, in reality, incredibly weak. And this slide just perfectly lays out the massive hurdles they faced. First, like we said, no government institutions to work with. Second, the infrastructure was non-existent. We're talking virtually no modern roads, no telephone lines. It was incredibly hard to govern or even just supply troops. And third, and this is probably the most important one, the vast majority of Tibetans had their own very strong, very distinct cultural and political identity. They just didn't see themselves as being Chinese.
For most of the 1950s, the situation was difficult, but Beijing was managing it. But then 1959 came along. And in 1959, their frontier problem didn't just get worse, it completely exploded. And just look at this number, 230,000. It's staggering. And it shows that the famous uprising in Lhasa in '59 didn't just happen out of the blue. Communist land reforms in Tibetan areas that were outside of the main Tibetan region had already kicked off huge armed resistance. By the end of 1958, the government had already put down revolts involving more than 230,000 people. The whole area was a powder keg waiting to blow. And then, in March 1959, the fuse was lit in the capital, Lhasa. Protests spiraled out of control into a massive uprising. A new People's Assembly was formed, and they did the one thing Beijing could not tolerate. They declared Tibet independent and publicly tore up the 17-point agreement.
For China, this was an absolute crisis. Their claim to a huge chunk of their territory was suddenly under direct, open threat. This revolt was a total watershed moment. It forced Beijing to completely abandon its earlier, more hands-off approach. It was time to solve their frontier problem, once and for all. And this quote right here, from Deng Xiaoping way back in 1950, it shows you exactly how deeply connected these two ideas were in the minds of China's leaders. To them, stability with ethnic minorities and national defense were basically the same thing. You couldn't have one without the other. An unstable frontier was, by definition, an undefendable frontier.
The 1959 revolt took that core belief and made it frighteningly real for Beijing. They were convinced the uprising had foreign support, especially from the US and India. Their absolute worst fear, that a hostile foreign power would exploit their vulnerable soft underbelly, seemed to be happening right before their eyes. From that point on, securing the frontier wasn't just about border patrols anymore. It now meant imposing total political and social control inside Tibet.
So what was the immediate result? Well, the PLA moved in and crushed the revolt. The local Tibetan government was dissolved, and Beijing set up its own direct rule. But the effects rippled outwards too. China very quickly moved to settle its border disputes with its neighbors, like Burma and Nepal. The strategy was really smart. Offer them good deals on the border in exchange for two critical things. First, their official recognition of Chinese sovereignty over Tibet, and second, their help in sealing the border to cut off any support for the rebels who were still fighting. So at the end of the day, the annexation of Tibet wasn't just a single act, but really the end result of a powerful strategic fear, a fear of frontier vulnerability that got supercharged by the 1959 revolt. The whole thing led to this incredibly forceful push to consolidate control, which leaves us with one final and really crucial question to think about. How did the lessons China learned the hard way in Tibet in 1959 end up shaping its entire playbook for other frontier regions for decades to come?